So yeah, super excited today. Joined by Trevor Calabro, UX researcher, consultant, author of UX Research in the Wild and the Mind Behind a Framework that's going to be around how do we get super clear about the value of research, which I'm sure is on everyone's mind. Trevor has a ton of great ideas around this stuff, which we're going to talk about today, including a take home, a leave behind. But I also want to hear from other folks as we go through. We'll have time at the end. If you have different ways that you've found have been effective in demonstrating research, value in research. So welcome, Trevor.
Hi.
Um, um, so yeah, if you do have questions throughout the session, drop them in the chat and we'll bring them up at the end. Carly's here to help me go and make sure I've got them at the end. So they're not gonna get lost. And it's helpful because sometimes I'll be able to weave those through the topic that we're talking about if I can keep it on track. Um, and so for everyone that doesn't know, my name is Ned Dwyer. I'm co-founder and CEO of Great Question. We're the all-in-one UX research tool trusted by folks at the likes of Amazon, Intuit, Canva, Miro, kind of you name it. And so the smorgasbord, and it's all around how do we help people democratize research at scale? And a big focus for us is how we help the researchers we work with demonstrate impact in their organization. Um, and so, for those that don't know you yet, maybe Trevor, you can tell us a bit more about your background and kind of what led you in this to this strong interest in like how do we quantify research ROI?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Also, thanks for that intro. So yeah, I've been doing user experience I'm in my 19th year now. I started off doing research and design, but soon after I started, within the first couple of years, I transitioned to primarily just research. And I've been doing user research ever since. And about the last 5 to 6 years, I've been primarily responsible for spinning up full research departments, research ops, and things of that nature. Everything from small, pre-profit startups to some big multi-billion-dollar tech conglomerates. So this is kind of like the last 6 to 7 years of my life's work condensed into 3 steps. So I wrote this article on my Substack. I do a weekly Substack, so thanks for that. I think that's how the team at Great Questions found me. Was I wrote this particular one. I've been doing it for 2.5 years, once a week. I wrote
Mhm.
one about calculating ROI. It kind of popped off a little bit in the US sphere, and I'm happy to talk about it. So, yeah, I've been doing it. I've been talking a lot about it. It kind of ebbs and flows. And this topic, I went back in preparation for this talk, and I've given a similar talk to this starting all the way back to 2011. So it seems like we're in an ebb time or a flow time right now, where
Mm,
calculating the ROI is really important. So I'm happy to talk about it, and happy to talk about this framework that's been, like I said, it's been stress tested in
mm, mm.
organizations, all shapes, sizes, industries. So I'm pretty confident that it'll work for most people.
Awesome. And so you're talking about that like ebb and flow, and that you've been talking about this since 2011. I'm sure the topic's gone back even further than that. Like, why do you think calculating the ROI of UX research is so important right now? Like, why has it come back? And or why do we forget it? Do we forget what it is, or it's just that we haven't quite come to an acceptance place of a default method for evaluating?
Yeah, I think the method has been the same throughout. And I
Mm,
think I talk about this in the article, but like uh, calculating ROI is not inherently a UX researcher's purview,
mm,
right? But we just seem to be perfectly suited to be the ones to do it, right? In all reality, it's most likely the UX management, the UX leadership, product leadership. But some of these things have fallen through the cracks over time. And I do believe that what happens is when the economic times get a little more tight, like they are now,
mm, mm,
and business folks, the MBAs of the world are looking at line items and they're trying to evaluate. You can think of it like a continuum of like jobs that have, that are absolutely
mm,
going to lose
mm,
headcount that everyone
mm,
kind of knows
mm,
about in the back of their mind, and then the ones that absolutely won't lose headcount. And we want this idea is like you want to not have to be retrospectively looking at it. It's not a retroactive thing like, oh no, it's time to think about ROI. You want before that, you want your leaders to have
mm,
that in their
mm.
mind. Where does UX live on that continuum? You want that in their mind day one, so proactively. So I think what happens many times is we kind of forget about it. When times are good, it is something that can easily be cut from our processes simply to
Yep.
churn out more research. So a lot of the
Mm,
times,
mhm.
especially in the world of UX, we really want to dive our time and efforts into doing the research itself. But what about this overarching, larger, more ops level thing? So this framework has really helped to transform the large organizations, even more so than the smaller ones. But I have seen it scale all the way down to little teeny operations as well.
And so you talked about there about some of the things that get in the way of people actually measuring this, measuring the impact. The blockers, I guess, and one of them is overloaded with work, being focused on output, don't focus on value, right? Maybe is that sort of thing. But like, what other misconceptions or blockers kind of are stopping people from doing this?
Yeah, so in the frame, it's a five-step frame. Everything's steps, right? So it's a five-step framework. The first step is just identifying the problems and establishing the benchmarks. That is by far the place where people just the getting started. And it goes back to what I said about proactive versus retroactive, right? So if you're in a spot in which your leadership is asking you to kind of like prove your value, you're already behind the eight ball. You're already on that continuum. You're already probably not where you wish you were at. So because of that, because it's not embedded in most people's day to day, that's the part that kind of gets a little bit muddied in the water. So that I believe like I said, I've been talking about it since 2011. There's nothing revolutionary in what I've been talking about or
Mm,
in my blog
mm,
posts.
mm.
It's just simply the method of, I'll give you behind the scenes here. It's just reverse engineering the way you think about uh, uh, planning, scheduling, and the repositories usage of your research. Uh, Reverse engineering it from an ROI perspective, right?
Yep.
So that's
Yep.
that's the whole value of this framework. But it seems to really work in this method here. So it's coming up with those. And then the second part, there's step four is calculating the ROI and converting it over to money. I find many teams struggle with that part as well because it's kind of like a sequential thing. If you, by reverse engineering it, if you first have established the problems that you're fixing through your UX team's initiatives, and then if you establish benchmarks, then the step four, the calculating the ROI, is simple. But many times, like I said, we're doing that on the fly. We're doing that under pressure. We're doing that, with all kinds of like perverse incentives going on instead of just being part of our day-to-day work.
So yeah, let's maybe come take it back to the top is I know we're going to be sharing out of resources everyone afterwards. We'll link to the doc for everyone in the to not to the docs but to the blog post. But yeah, walk us through these five steps. I know the first one is really about identifying the problem and establishing benchmarks.
Yeah, so I'm going to share my screen here. I put together a little
Great.
thing. We'll also share, I just put this together this morning. I will share this
Great.
slide deck as well. It won't make sense to people that aren't really watching, but maybe people get some value out of it. Tell me if you can see it.
Got it. Yeah, that's
All
right.
right. There's the big old QR code. This is the article that was published in January. So I just wrote these out, just very simple. So by the way, the article's, I don't know, it's like 4,000, 5,000 words. It goes way in depth. It
Mm,
has
mm.
numerous real world examples. But I'll talk about it really briefly here. And if we want to dive in, we can. Here's the real article I've got up if we want to like talk about it.
Great.
Um, so yeah, step one, just identify the problem and establish benchmarks. This, like I said, is the number one place that I see teams struggle with in the beginning. And it goes to any other framework. It's just like, what does your team prioritize? These things usually go on the wayside for more immediate type initiatives. So if we can, and I'm confident that when I help teams implement this in the real world, by the way, that's what it's UX research in the wild. Everything I talk about is the real world. So this is not
Mm.
theory. This is,
Awesome.
yeah, stress tested by many different orgs. So I've boiled it down to these things that work, very consistently against different kind of orgs. So, you just kind of find the friction that users are having and measure it. We're already doing this, right? Our projects this is probably pre-done for most of us today. Many projects are
Mm,
already in the pipeline. They're coming down to us. Now, the thing is, again, if I can encourage everyone to just kind of reverse engineer this from the business perspective. So we usually think of it as like user needs, like what is it? It's a Venn diagram, right? User needs, business needs, requirements. And
mm,
we think about that middle part. Well, think about just when you're talking about this component, think about just that business needs circle, right? And I'll speak deeply about how we still embed the user needs. Of course, they're there, but that is inherently part of our job, inherently part of the UX function.
mm,
what if the UX function also kind of thought backwards, reverse engineered, and started to predefine our initiatives in this way? And then here's a nice little example. So imagine you're a store manager, you spend two, and you get, I've got many examples like this. All right, so step two, define the goals. Again, this is like you could put these two steps for almost any framework for literally anything that you want to measure, right? But it really sets the foundation so that you won't have any hiccups on the further steps that get into the weeds here. So yeah, you want to set clear UX and business goals. This is where you kind of map, you go back and map it back to what you think the business wants, what the business needs. This is where I know a big part of democratization is aligning with our business partners. And this is a great way to start that conversation. Again, there's no reason why UX practitioners are the ones doing this, except for the fact, we could easily be slotted in this spot. And it's an opportunity to talk about all kinds of stuff. For instance, at my last 4 or 5 orgs, I got to learn the average salary, so, to be able to quantify these things in the end. You get to once you start to understand these kind of things, or the average cost, the average like a lifetime value, some of these other metrics that may be coming from marketing that we may not always be privy to, or we may not always be thinking about when it comes to our immediate like feature building needs or any other kind of typical UX research stuff. There's the example there. When we share this out, if you go through this, this is a single example that goes through the 5. And there's many more in the article itself. Step 3, gather the data to estimate ROI. So you have to collect these real numbers and then do the math. So I like to think about this as like, again, you're reverse engineering. You're not saying first, what do we have in our tool? What are we currently measuring? What does a current NPS look like? That's kind of how we do it today, right? We say, okay, usability is discoverability, learnability, efficiency, memorability, errors, satisfaction, measure that. Now what? I'm saying, what if we took a different tact? That's a good way to figure out the methods. That's a good way to structure our backlogs. But what about the communication part and the overarching ops part? And this is thinking about those numbers slightly differently. So yeah, imagine that you want to see how long if it takes 1 minute per query, searching it within a search system. That's about. Also note throughout all my documentation, approximate symbols. I'll talk about this in step 5. Or there it says cost estimates, right? This is very strategic. Calculate the ROI and convert to money. So it's not always going to be money, but it's always going to be money. This is what I say to most people, like, let's just try to convert it back to money, right? And this is a step in which I see the hiccups. And it's simply because it's really hard to say our CSAT went up by 30% equals how much money, right? So that's why if you took a strategic look, you started from step 1 instead of starting from step 3, it makes a lot of difference in this. So here's the classic ROI formula. This is nothing new, right? Cost savings divided by cost times 100. The times 100 gives you just a percentage for ROI, and then you could convert that to money. And then the comparisons, right? So in this case, it's roughly there again, strategically, roughly $300,000 in labor yields an estimated 7. Now, by the way, and this is my next step. I'm gonna steal the thunder from step 5 is 757% ROI is meaningless, right? I see many people stop at this. It is what is this in context? In fact, many times this could destroy the credibility of your UX efforts because it's like, if there's a perfect hockey stick exponential curve, and then in 3 years we will the fact that we moved the submit button and labeled the button, now we're going to make $17 billion. It's like, okay, you've just destroyed your credibility. And I've literally seen a slide deck that looks something like that communicates these numbers, something like that, because they're under the pressure of prove it or lose it. They're under the pressure of retroactively going back and trying to make sense of everything that's happened. So that's why, again, the whole framework is based on being proactive and then communicate effectively. So again, you want to match the stakeholders' priorities. You want to summarize this in the language they speak. That's why it's almost always money savings or money made. So here's a good example. And a majority of the feedback I got from the presentation or from my article is these sections right here. I'll just skim through. So here's like my first real world example. It's a simple example, and then it goes into a complex example. This literally just plugs the numbers in, like, hey, say you found out this, you know? And then it was this section right here, communicate the results, step 5. And if you just kind of read this over, I won't read it to you, but you can kind of see that this is not what would be on a slide deck, but this is how we should talk about these things. So at the end of the day, we can say for every dollar spent, we gain almost, $1.75 in return. That right there is something that moves the needle on that in the
mm,
C-suite when they're making those
mm,
decisions. Where does it put you as far as value add? Oh, well, I know
mm,
for a fact that the
mm,
last blah 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 projects, it's not the number itself. It is a number itself at the project level, but at the C-suite level, it's the fact that you've done this over time and that you've proven that you add real business value over time.
mm.
That's what the real value of this framework is. So that's a
That's great.
yeah, crash course. And while we talk, I'll just put this. People people always ask, what are some others? So here's just some
Mm.
a
Yeah,
random
great.
assortment of stuff. So go ahead. Sorry, Whew, that was a lot.
No, this is great. This is great. I think because I think I mean I've got a bunch of questions here, and yeah, feel free to throw some more questions in the chat. I think
Mhm.
the first one is, I think there's many organizations that sometimes resistant to quantification of this stuff, right? I think particularly about early stage startups. I know that I've been like that at some times. Like, hey, look, we need to better understand this, but it's hard for me to really quantify what the potential output could be. Um, and maybe that's partly that one, you should run from those organizations that don't want to try and quantify these things, because how are they making any decisions if they're not able to quantify impact? But two, this also kind of implies almost a top-down prioritization to some extent, right? It's like, oh, this is a project that's been passed on from above. Now you're having to go and do the work with that team to go and evaluate the metrics that it's going to move and then the outcome it could have. Because the counter to that would be, and maybe this is a separate question, but this is at least three questions here, would be how do we empower people to go and seek out the right problems to identify, to go and conduct research in from the start that should have the highest ROI impact versus necessarily quantifying impact of projects that are cast down upon them. Anyway, hopefully there's something in there for you to grab onto.
Yeah, no, I've thought about this deeply, right? So I think I
Mm,
can, I
mm,
think let me first address the comment about data averse environments. So
mm,
what I just went through, although it may have implied top down, here I do have a slide for this just in case it came up. I have this, okay, I got a hot take on some
mm,
things.
mm,
My hot take is I call it this opt-in approach to it's like bottoms up servant leadership. If you think of UX and UX research as a service to the business and you think of it as bottoms up, and then the HCI opt-in, it's a dark pattern to have something pre-checked, that kind of
mm,
thing. Like you should allow people to have choice. So these three things combined go into I have a whole article about it here if you want to see. It's called Opt-in Approach to Building blah 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 in the Real World.
love
So
that.
yep. And this piggybacks on another article I've written, which is why I stay in IC. So
Mm, mm,
uh, I'm not just like talking about the blog. I'm just saying I've already written. I
great.
started a blog so I could write all my thoughts out so I could just
Yep.
refer to them, right? So I came up with this system, this way of thinking. Again, it's yet another framework. And the way I look at it is no matter what. Okay, so I gave the example of, yeah, in my last couple orgs, I've learned the average salary. Many HR departments, that's a good call out. They're not going to give you that information. There's liability there, right? It's funny that you noted that maybe some small orgs would be more apprehensive. The small orgs are less likely, in my experience. It's the larger orgs
Cool.
there's layers of bureaucracy that are not going to want to give you that information. But
Mm,
this is where we go into what I call like a proxy ROI kind of thing. You've heard of Dropbox, right? Dropbox,
mm,
when they were trying to scale, they found out that like out of all the user metrics, if they just tracked people clicking the download button, it correlated to all this other stuff they cared about. So that was a proxy like user behavior thing to track. We can do the same thing on the ROI side. You can find it, and it's a little more difficult. I talk about that in the article to dive in deeper. But it's essentially the same framework. It's the same thing, except you find a thing that correlates, and then you go from there. So, for instance, I can't get the real average salary. I can do some kind of macro analysis across the industry. Like most people
mm,
around the industry, blah blah blah. Um,
mm.
And then that's the proxy metric that plugs into your equation, and then the ROI. One thing I skipped over a little bit is that step 5, when you calculate, I talk a lot about I round down, error on the conservative side, because you always want your estimates to be lower, so for them to be predictive and to be real in the real world and to have credibility, you want to just err on the side of caution there. So these things combined can make and this idea that you're an opt-in approach, you find one sympathetic project team, one sympathetic person within the org, and you can start to run these calculations, right? It just has to be you and one other person. And because I've synthesized it into these 5 steps, I'm confident you could do it in your day-to-day work without adding any more huge capacity demands. Like I've seen it happen, right? You can do this one little thing at a time. And then I have another slide for this. And then I think of it like concentric circles, right? You have one sympathetic team. It's a meritocracy. Again, if you can prove the ROI as well as you go along, you hit the a home run with one particular targeted project, and then that can blossom out. Maybe it's the same sympathetic team again and again, but trust me, over time, even the late adopters of this process will then they'll want to engage, because they can see they'll either be forced to by their bosses, or they will want the outcomes that you're providing. So it's a perfect meritocracy from bottoms up. It causes you and your team to do good work. It causes you to focus on the things that actually have business impact, right? So a secondary effect of doing this 5-step process is, all of a sudden, now that you're thinking about ROI from the get, you're not just doing things that have little impact on the business, right? Those fall lower on your priority stack.
That's great. I love that you've got so many examples in here and in the article, because I think sometimes it's hard to figure out, how would I calculate this? For us, like, a common question we get asked when people are buying a research tool like Great Question is, how am I going to quantify this to my boss? And you've got this, yeah, these are great. How am I going to quantify a research tool like Great Question to my boss? And different organizations actually value different things. So some people do think about, look, it's about hourly savings of a research ops person. They're currently spending 1 day a week in ops land and recruitment land. If I can get that back, then I can save that time. Or maybe I can add an extra headcount so we can get more throughput. But some organizations don't care so much about those things. They're like, well, we've got a person in that role. I don't want to fire that person. They're going to keep doing that research ops work. So efficiency might not be the thing there, but then there are other benefits where I think people might care about tool consolidation, which is like a multiplier on time across the rest of the organization for training, onboarding. Other people care about cost savings across tooling, or cost savings. So they're like, oh, rather than these 5 tools, this expensive tool, I can get a more affordable tool. And so I think it's interesting, different orgs. The point I was trying to make really was, different orgs sometimes care about different metrics, whether it's about time savings, cost savings, efficiencies, other things in these valuations.
Yeah. So, like, for instance, yeah, you can't say it, but I can say it. These, by the way, everything I do is real world. Okay. So these, I mean, you can go back and look at my LinkedIn, and you'd be able to figure out what company belongs to each one of these bullets. So these are real things. So under that first UX research tool impact, you hit the nail on the head. Maybe it's just this. Maybe it's just hours. So this is based on a real world example in which we had to write business cases internally to get budget, right? So we had to write business cases. You would be surprised how few business cases go through some of these large organizations that have zero actual quantification in there. It's more based on, like personal capital within the org structure. It's based on where you live within, how many executive leaders you have to champion your idea. But imagine a world in which you have that plus actual numbers. It makes it very easy to champion. So we were able to do a quick calculation into our business case, and we got to retool. It was, and then we did another example, like you said. What's the cost of an all-in-one tool versus right now we're paying for X amount of people to use SurveyMonkey and Optimum Workshop and some other tool, like all these tools together. Well, you can do a cost benefit analysis right there and do that quantification. And then I saw in the chat, someone said, what about calculating not doing something? So I put that in the last bullet there. So there's the opportunity cost. That's a huge one. Risk mitigation in some of the a recent org I've worked with. risk mitigation is their primary driver. By the way, never in my career, everywhere else I ever worked, they were all about making money and moving fast. This particular organization is very keen on risk mitigation. So that particular ROI driver is very, very, very compelling when we're communicating to leadership. Why do I say all that? Why did I make this slide? Simply to say, step one, step two gets you this, right? This is the part people skip. The understanding what like your business, think like an MBA for a hot minute. You don't talk about cognitive load for 10 minutes. Instead, think about what cognitive load reduction could actually mean to the business, right? And I do believe that these are just random examples, but if you do that upfront work, it takes a little extra time to figure out that strategy. This is how you can scale and democratize across, is you figure out these things. When Dropbox figured out that one button, it changed everything for them as far as metrics and moving fast. So just imagine if you could figure out the one that works for you.
That's great. So another question from the chat from Chinar is what non-monetary forms of ROI are most meaningful in resource-constrained community research projects? It's the start of it, but I think that the part of the question I think is maybe most relevant is like, how do you document intangible outcomes like shifts in trust or empowerment? What value to assign to them in evaluating ROI? And we live in a capitalist society, so maybe some of these things, it's like, well, you need to keep digging deeper until we get to the dollar ROI figure so we can better quantify this. But yeah, any thoughts or experience around that?
Yeah, I'd say partner with the people that know these things. So lifetime customer value, go to the marketing department, talk to them about this. That goes back to the idea of proxy ROI calculations, right? So you can lead. Okay, so when it comes to these proxies, every step extrapolated away from what UX is doing is going to be less and less compelling. So I do argue that I believe you could find a one-to-one thing that the UX team is doing that could fit the business. It just takes time. Another thing I forgot to say was the beauty of the system is step 1 and 2 are iterative, right? We don't just, you try these things. So for instance, here's a really good tactic that works is, let's say you've done one of these things. So step 1 and 2 are you just figure out what to fix, try to fix it, figure out the numbers the metrics and numbers that you're going to use to do the calculations. Step 3 is do the calculation and then wah, wah, wah. It's like, oh boy, this isn't that great, or this doesn't actually make money at all. It's actually negative. It's a net negative. So it's all about transparency. It's about being, holding yourself accountable. The tactic here is you can daisy chain many projects together. So I talked with a team that's like, we work in sprints. This isn't going to work, right? Okay, I understand that. Because they've modularized their output of research to fit the sprint methodology. That's great. What I'm talking about here is more an ops layer on top. So a really good step 1 for aggregating, by the way, everyone should be this is a whole nother topic. Everyone should be aggregating their sprint level research work into macro type research. Tools like Great Questions help with this. I know the AI stuff that you guys have put in there is really great with this kind of thing. But the human in the loop, you need to understand this, right? The AI can get you there quick, super efficient. Then you need to understand it. One really great step is to lay a framework on your sprint level stuff. So you daisy chain 4 or 5 projects together. You find that sympathetic team, you lay 4 or 5, and then then there's the net story that you're telling. So that compelling story I told before, the step 5, just imagine being able to do that, but with a series of things. And you can even, however is most compelling to the org or to the stakeholders you're talking to.
So do you see this approach, does it change much across like industry or roles, or is it actually, it's a pretty ubiquitous, it's a pretty flexible framework?
Yeah, so the framework is technologically agnostic, right? So the use of tools are accelerants, and they can expedite, they can evangelize throughout, they can make everything more efficient. But in and of itself, I've seen this work with spreadsheets at a startup that had a design team of 2, like very literally. There is the only thing that changes is the step 1 and 2, as far as identifying the right things and mapping them back to business. So for instance, I've done this at universities. The university I was working for did not they did not use just straight up money as their key North Star metric, this particular team. So we had to figure out other things. So it was like time, by the way, it always converted to money at some point, right? So like someone in some room was doing the calculation. It just was not meant for us to actually calculate. So there was never, I never had a presentation deck in which I said, therefore we save this much money. I just stopped at that point. But it was like staff hours reduction. It was like support ticket reduction. It's actually one of the examples. It's the simple example in here. This example right here. Demonstrate the ROI, calculate real, imagine, yeah, online registration form. So this couldn't be any more straightforward, right? It was just the design team was tasked with optimizing the form. The reason they figured this out was because there was a bunch of support calls coming, not support calls, but whatever it would be, like students couldn't like register for classes, right? So this was like it was making the university look like they weren't very like hip with it and tech savvy. This was a while back before everything was totally digitized, right? So anyway, so it really oh wait, I thought I was sharing my screen.
No, that's all right. But please bring it back up. But
there we go.
Yeah, we go. Yeah.
If you were to have seen my screen, it would have been made a lot more sense. I was just showing this example here. So so this is the example right with the first example in the source article. So anyway, the thing that changed was just identifying the iterative cycle of step 1 and 2 to identify the right things that map out that then make sense, right? But the system as a whole is agnostic. It works. I've stress tested it in many different environments. It works across the board. But the calculations, those have been tried and true. And let's put it this way: every discipline in your business that's on this side of the credibility, like less likely to be laid off like continuum, does this, and they've been doing it. So my argument here is it's just time for UX to like be held to the same rigor as our colleagues that are considered essential. Like let's be essential.
Yeah, I love this. I think I've been thinking about this problem in a slightly different way from my lens, where we're doing this internally. We've got one researcher. In fact, we're just about to hire some more researchers. But we have a role that we're going to open up called a growth researcher. We're going to title it growth researcher. And the growth researcher actually is going to be working purely with sales and marketing. That's all that they're working around. And so you talk about credibility, who's close to the dollar, who's going to be able to clearly demonstrate an ROI, right? Those teams, particularly sales, right? They've got to talk about how many deals did you close this month and how much revenue did you bring in? And if you didn't, there's performance management around that. And if you do, then you do really well. Great. Yep. And so how can we best support those teams? And so the things that we're thinking about there is closed and lost analysis research. Why are we losing the deals we lose? Why do we lose? We're missing this feature. We're missing that feature. There was a pricing thing. There was X, Y, and Z. That data is actually really hard for the sales team to get to because it takes time and it takes patience. And so it happens periodically. But a growth researcher feels like it's not, for me, I'm seeing that as an opportunity to go and support that team, because previously when we've done it, we've had a significant increase, up to a 50% increase in revenue purely as a result of making minor changes based on closed lost analysis. Huge, huge. So we're like, let's go and get someone on that, make it someone's job. It's probably not a full-time job, but it's a job. And so in that regard, I guess I would love to hear any thoughts that you have around people actively seeking out opportunities that are closer to the dollar to demonstrate impact where their current business unit or things are being foisted upon them and maybe a little bit less economically inclined, right? If you have any thoughts around that, and or any other real world examples you've got where teams successfully measured ROI and the outcomes of that.
Yeah, I had a big smile and I pulled up this because my last article was just this. So this is a very misleading title. I have many thoughts on A/B testing, but it's really about correlation is not causation. And the idea here is just simply talking about causal inference and how to figure this all out. So this is what you're talking about. You're talking about like, how do we, okay, we were talking about lifetime customer value, and I talked about how this is a proxy metric and every step away it gets harder and harder and less compelling. It
Mm.
gets less compelling to the folks in leadership that are looking at quarterly, all the
Mm.
way down to sprint level things. So the tighter, by the way, which is most of the world we live in, you're talking about an environment in which, um, like how do you prove it is the thing, right? How do you
Mm.
prove, like, we brought
Totally.
on a researcher, we had 50% more revenue. Ta-da! That may be good
Yeah.
enough. I know places like Airbnb when they started. I know places like Apple just inherently did these things. They just inherently believed, and no one had to prove their value or
Right.
like go to bat for the. But I know for me in my career, many times I've been in roles in which I was justifying my existence at the company. Um, this is a thing that we have to deal with today. And I do believe, in my experience at least, there's more teams that are faced with that than that aren't. So when you're in one of those, if you want to, you can figure out how to turn your. This is all about triangulation and stuff, right? But there are ways to turn, if you are able to figure out causation and not correlation, not just correlation. If you can figure out causation with some methods that I talk about here, then it makes the ROI calculations really straightforward. This is how you can get to lifetime customer value and some other things that are proxies. So it all depends on. I think of it like this. I think of it as like this: right size your research efforts. If you work at a place
Mm.
that doesn't care, high five, you did it, move on. Like, you
Yeah.
did it. They respect you. They've hired you 50%. Everyone loves it. Why would you build up this like entire you know discipline? If you're at the other end of the spectrum, in which every day is a little bit of a struggle and you're convincing upwardly all the time, and this opt-in
Mm.
thing that I'm talking about in the real world, like a large bureaucratic type organization that may have maybe top heavy and may be driven by MBA level thinking, these kind of like write out the 5 things you did this week that were important kind of like methodologies.
Yeah.
If you are in those kind of environments, there's nothing better than actually showing the real numbers. And I don't know if I answered your question, but the way there are ways to do this. It gets more and more complicated the more abstract, or the more steps away you get from the actual number, from
Yes.
that like sprint
Yes.
level thing. But there
Yes.
are definitely methods to do it. So I
Yeah.
just say, remember I said it's easy to lay this on and get quick wins. That's that's to say if you're at the project level. And the opt-in approach always starts at the project level and grows.
Mm.
So as you have more high-level people within your org that have opted into learning about how you're doing these things, then you can expand the scope. And over time, you can, it's a virtuous cycle um, in which you hit, or like you said, there are rare cases in which you hit a total wall where there's someone that's just like, I blatantly refuse to be data driven. And
Mm.
at that moment, you have to ask yourself, what good does a research discipline do at a place that blatantly doesn't want data?
Yeah, what a nightmare. It actually makes me think about the hiring process when you're actually going into companies. One, you're getting to interview with the research leadership or the design leadership and understanding how do you measure the impact? How do you measure my impact? How do you demonstrate ROI? And if you don't get satisfactory answers, no bueno. But equally, you'll hopefully get a chance to meet with other leadership or other departments and asking them how they would do the same thing. It's a great way to ensure that you're setting yourself up for success when you actually get inside that
I
organization.
find it's a minority though. Most organizations
Yeah.
do not have this figured out. So I do believe that using some frameworks like this, starting
Yes.
small, concentric circle outward, is a way to, what never works? I'll tell you what never works. Maybe it's a better way to explain it. What never works is to cite the study. Like in 2001, IBM proved that for every $10 spent, there's $100 worth of ROI of
Uh,
UX on there. Now that's a true study that really happened.
right. Right.
Forrester
Right.
did
Right.
another
Right.
study, right?
Yeah.
And now those are important studies that changed the landscape of technology. They're
Mm.
the reason why UX
Mm.
is a discipline today. I mean, they really are great. They're great. I have never once seen that convince anyone in modern like departments or a stakeholder that we need
It's
to.
too far removed. To your
It's
point,
too
it's too
far.
far
It's too
removed.
far.
Yeah.
That's exactly why this kind of framework is helpful,
Yes.
because
Yeah.
it's
Right.
just not real world. It's you've like, imagine if we were like IBM, and there's so many if thens, and I don't know about you, but in my research career, more time than not, people are like, it's a show not tell model. right? Telling people does not work, showing them does. And
Yes.
that's what this model does. It's a show not tell, reverse engineer, influenced by merit.
Which again, to my hiring point around, asking these sorts of questions as you're going into a role, to your point, they may not have the answer, right? That doesn't necessarily indicate that it's necessarily a problem, but then the opportunity is to then come in and say, well, here's how I've done it previously, or here's how I would go about doing this. Does this make sense for you? And then show them actually once you're there.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
my experience is unique because that's why people come to me, right? So
yes,
so like
yes.
inherently the people I'm working with are interested in this kind of thing. But
Mm,
um but yeah, I and maybe that skews my answer a little bit, but I do believe in my experience in like talking with a lot of different people on a lot of different teams. Like I said, I've been doing this for almost 20 years. Like yeah, you may never find an org that has all the right answers to those kind of questions. And that's why
mm,
they need people like us. That's why it's
yeah,
great. It's a great, I look at it as an opportunity. Like this
yeah,
is the opportunity help, um, to help make, make every company, every tech company at least claims they're data driven. Let's help them actually stay true to that,
yes, yeah. I love that.
North Star.
And so this is great. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground here. Glad we're sharing these assets afterwards. Love all the really practical examples. And that blog post, you haven't checked it out, that's really great. More and more examples in there as well. I'm curious to hear from any folks in the chat that have seen alternative ways or alternative examples where they have demonstrated value within their organization or demonstrated ROI, I should say, on research efforts. Because yeah, we'd love to hear alternate methods or people that have used Trevor's framework in the past as well and found success there. Um, just coming back to our 50% increase metric, we did ascribe that to research that we did around close lost, and effectively the reason why we were losing deals in that when we did the original study, which led to such a big increase, was we were missing certain key pieces of functionality. And as we went and built each of these pieces of functionality backed by partly by that research, but it was a series of other studies that we ran over time. To your point, it all adds up to more meta research. We were able to start to see the close rate on every deal in our pipeline increase until the point where we had, this quite an inflection point. And so we were able to go, how do we figure, like, what changed? We looked at it, we didn't know it we knew that revenue was changing. We knew that close rates were changing. We're all really excited about it. But I didn't, in the moment, it wasn't like, oh, it was based on that research. It was only looking back. I had to go and say, what happened around this month here? It seems to be that's where the inflection started changing. And then it was like, oh, was that close loss analysis? Which is fun. A fun way
Yeah.
to do, but it was far in hindsight than necessarily thinking. We knew we had to change close loss rates. That was the big metric we were trying to change, and there is dollar value it ascribes to that. It's very easy to demonstrate ROI or potential ROI, but it took a while for us to bring it back to actually say, oh no, that was actually the impact.
Yeah, I mean, if you really want to dig deep into this, for large orgs, I do believe that like thinking about causation and doing some causal math
Mm,
is good.
mm,
Um, by the way, I learned all this stuff on the job. It's not like I have a
yeah,
PhD or anything.
yeah, yeah.
I just happened to work at a place that did statistical software for like
Mm,
9 years, right? So I
mm,
learned all this
mm,
stuff, and now
mm.
we can apply it in the real world. But again, these are the things that the other disciplines have been doing for a while. We just have to realize and give ourselves a little grace. Like UX is new, you know,
Mm,
like Jacob Nielsen he's still a practitioner, right?
mm,
Like I know that guy. Like that's
mm,
weird for other
mm,
disciplines. They don't, no one's hanging out with
mm.
Henry Ford right now, right? So like the idea is to take small steps iteratively. Um, just I think sometimes um, just the right size research approach is good. So one of the one of the things to maybe be cautious about with the 5-step process is to just go and blindly do it right off the bat, and then be like, oh, it didn't work, right? It's the step 1 and 2 in the iterative loop there,
Mm,
and the
mm,
thinking deeply about it from a strategic point.
mm,
This is goes to the democratization point. That's
mm,
where we talk with other people in the business. This is where
mm.
so there is a little extra upfront time in that step 1 and 2.
Love that. The pragmatism of that. And the final question, and then I think we'll wrap, is from Jordan. So in our organic research often adds time and scope because we're finding big gaps in the requirements, iterating on designs, probably iterating on the value we're going to derive as well, and like getting tighter on that, which takes time. And time's money. What are some metrics you suggest exploring for this situation where yeah, adding research often adds time and scope? I would say imagine what would happen if you didn't do the research. But yeah, any thoughts there, Trevor?
Yeah, same thing. I do believe this stuff is best done if it's based on merit. So if
Mm,
you're trying to convince someone we
mm.
need higher
Opt
time
in.
and scope because of XYZ, and I'm going to use persuasive tactics, and I'm
Mm,
going to try to use my, I keep forgetting the term, but my like, my social capital. There we go. I'm going to use
yeah,
all
yeah.
use up all my social capital because this is a really big important thing.
Mm,
I think the show not tell model. So
mm,
it may be, and this has happened to me before, and out of the last 7 teams that I've onboarded onto this 5-step process, there was one in which they ran across this. So I have some practical advice here. Is it was like a firm that wanted to add this into this, so it was time, and it was like like straight up time. It's so funny because in that world they're like, okay, the salesperson went and sold this. We have this amount of time. Like like they modularized every part of the UX stream. Like, there's a card sort here. We don't really need a card sort. What can we do that seems like a
mm,
card sort that we can call a card sort, but it's not a card sort, blah, 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 right? So there are ways to do some like trickery, but you may have to go a little bit and above and beyond for those
mm,
first couple opportunities, if that makes
mm,
sense.
mm,
So remember, the very first question you asked is where are the blockers? It's that step one and that step one. And
mm,
if you're strategic about it, if you think a little, that's where you can put in the extra time. But the rest is plug and play. And if you're in a larger org and you evangelize this over time, it compounds upon itself. And you can
mm.
use the integration of tools laying on top of this just makes it expedited over and over again. And to your point, Ned, I do believe at some point, if you're calculating ROI, you'll then be able to calculate what it would have been like if you didn't do that.
And to that point, we have a real world example on that, which is we have our own studies that we've run where we launched features. We've launched certain features and they haven't gone well, right? Might be a bug in it, or maybe it wasn't received well. We didn't tell enough people about it. The usage wasn't as much as we would like. And we recently launched card sorting and tree testing, and the product development process on that and the research process on those projects, 2 projects, but really it's the one project. We're like, wow, that was incredible. That was like best in class across the board. And so rather than just doing some generative research or desk research and maybe a prototype test, we also did some concept testing, and we did some pricing sensitivity stuff, and then we did a proper beta program. And now no one on the team wants to go back to the previous world where we were not doing that rigorous on a feature. And it's also elevating the sort of work that we're doing because we're no longer doing this small patch feature work stuff. No, it's because you can't justify doing that amount of rigor on a small project, right? We need to go and move to these larger, more meaningful, impactful projects in general. And so I think that speaks to that same thing.
We derivated all over the topic of ROI, but I do love this kind of stuff. We're talking about triangulation. We're talking about causal, like
Sure.
figuring out causation versus correlation. These are important things that I think as a discipline we're going to we're going to have to start integrating these into our methodology to have a seat at the table when it comes to like being taken seriously. So
Love that. And I think with that, we'll leave it to it. Thank you, Trevor, for the time. Looking forward to sharing out the recording and your take home. And we're sharing in the chat a link to Trevor's Substack. Definitely subscribe to that and follow Trevor on LinkedIn or
yeah, I don't put anything
Facebook.
under a paywall. I just use Substack. All my templates are free and
Right,
stuff. I don't
right.
do any of that. I clarify my thoughts in there. So sometimes it's rants, sometimes it's silly, sometimes it's
Mhm.
4,000 words on causal inference. So you never know.
Love it. Love it. Awesome. Thanks, Trevor. See you all soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.